Hello and welcome to the IR Thinker, where we explore the world of international relations one critical issue at a time. I'm Martin Zupko. Today it is a real pleasure to speak with the editorial team of the Contemporary Security Policy, one of the most influential journals in the field of international security studies. Since its founding in 1980, the journal has played a central role in shaping discussions on armed conflict, intervention, strategic change, and global security governance. The journal is currently led by three co-editors, Myriam Dunn Cavelty, Nicole Jenne, and Rejkers. Two of them are with us today. Professor Myriam Dunn Cavelty is a leading scholar of cybersecurity, risk politics, and the governance of emerging technologies based at ETH Zurich, Switzerland. And the second is Associate Professor Nicole Jenne, is an expert on Latin American security, civil-military relations, and regional responses to transnational threats at the Pontifical Catholic University of Chile, also a visiting scholar at the David Rockefeller Center for Latin American Studies at Harvard University. Welcome.
Hello.
Thank you.
Just for transparency, I want to say that at the time of recording, I have no manuscripts under submission or review with this journal, and this is stated in the interest of academic integrity and transparency. So let's start with the first question. Contemporary Security Policy has been publishing since 1980, and it's making it one of the oldest peer-reviewed journals in the field. How has the journal's core mission evolved over the more than 4 decades, and what has remained constant or unchanged?
So the journal started out as the Journal of Arms Control. So the focus was narrowed then. And it was also more centered on the United States. It broadened then to have a stronger footprint in Europe, create a European community. And that's something, let's say, if we want to call it a trend that we want to continue. We are working on making the journal still more global in its reach and widen that community. And also in terms of topics. So from the Journal of Arms Control, I mean, the name already tells it. It's no longer only about arms control. There are many, many more topics of international security policy that it covers now. One thing.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I wanted to add something, but if you're still speaking, Nicole,
No. Go ahead.
I think what is important, we also pre-discussed that, Martin, is that we actually only know the most recent history. So a lot of what we're going to tell you is, I would say like 5 years old, etc. And I think that's kind of typical also for the field. So I think security studies has evolved, or security policy has become one of these top topics only most recently. So it makes a lot of sense that the journal has grown with that. So this, expansion of topics. And we'll talk a bit more about our process, I guess, how we select things and what we send into review, etc. has a lot to do with the policy world. And I think that is a constant with the journals. With the journal, it has always been, policy oriented in many ways, even though the research is not, in that sense, think tanky or only on policy. But this link to the relevant political policy topics is the constant.
How would you characterize your DNA? What is unique for your journal? Because we know when we want to publish, we have approximately 50-60 journals that are sort of labeled as security studies. And sometimes people struggle to choose the correct one, the proper one for their particular field or intentional publication. So DNA of your journal, what is it?
I think that's a great question, because we also had to define that for ourselves. We have a lot of submissions, so we needed, this question answered for ourselves. I think it's in the title, contemporary. This is really important. We have a very close look at what kind of time span the articles cover. We say roughly 5 years, I think, Nicole. So the empirics should roughly fall into the last 5 years. So anything that's historical, that doesn't fit. So that's one part of the DNA. And then security policy, that's the other. So if we consider a topic, for example, too IR and not security focused enough, we don't think it fits. And then this policy element, it should be policy relevant. So an issue that really is discussed and matters, today in real life. And we also look at a fairly broad audience. So it's specialized, but we still want, the articles to speak to a fairly broad audience and also have topics that could be understood by non-academics. I think that is, in a nutshell, at least the DNA.
You mentioned that the CSP covers sort of remarkably broad terrain in security, from arms control to deterrence. Then we go for strategic culture or international institutions. And it's beautifully named or mentioned on your website, on the journal's website. But how do you maintain intellectual coherence across such a wide scope? Even for editor, I think it's quite demanding work, because you must be sort of like informed, and you must know all those main figures, main research through many fields in order to get the good reviewers or to assess the paper, which I think it's quite demanding job.
Well, here, I guess we look for good scholarship. So in a very classical, basic way, we want a clearly defined research question, then a theoretical framework, and empirical strategy that is then employed in a rigorous way. And for us, really, and Myriam talked about it when she talked about the DNA a bit, aims and scope are leading. We don't want a paper that talks to a very niche audience. We are well aware that there are other outlets for this, and it should be the case, but CSP is a journal, and we envision our readership as that is broadly interested, and we don't want papers to be read just by a handful of people. We want them to reach a wider audience. So as long as we can see that a paper is good scholarship and it is accessible for diverse people, then the next step is that we rely on our expert reviewers. It's sometimes, if a topic, of course, is not as close to our own research interest, it takes a bit longer to find suitable reviewers. Sometimes it doesn't take too long. And then it's really their verdict that we rely very heavily on. But this initial screening, I think, is more than looking for substantial details. Is that good scholarship that is accessible to a broad readership?
Yeah, and if I can add, you said, we need to know a lot. Yes, obviously you need to read a lot in security to understand, but we don't need to be the experts in all the top, or we couldn't. That's impossible. So I think what Nicole said is the most important. We read all the submissions, then we discuss them, the three of us. So that's a lot of work, but we do kind of have a clear yardstick, that all of the submissions that we then send into reviews need to fulfill. And good scholarship would also mean, clear research question, clear contribution, also theory and empirics. I think that's also really important. So even though we're a policy journal, we do have academic standards. And if a submission does not kind of follow this structure or this checklist, we will not send it out to review. We desk reject it. I know from other journals that they don't have such high desk reject rates, but this is for us really important to, kind of have this coherence, to have full control over what actually makes it into the journal. So we do a first selection of the ones that we believe will withstand peer review and only send those out.
How do you deal with those new perspectives? We know that sometimes scholars use security and they add some other word and say, oh, that's a new field, that's something, like I'm researching. So there are sort of emerging perspectives regarding security studies. And some of those fields are sort of more established, but some of them, they are slightly experimental. So what's the approach of the journal to those strands of security studies?
That's actually probably where we would be the weakest. So if something is, just ideas, even though they might be great, or not the weakest, but they would not fulfill those criteria that I just mentioned. So like completely experimental ideas would not fit into what we're looking for, because we do need a theoretical contribution and the empirics. And if you already want a theoretical contribution, something needs to be there. I think what we do often discuss is if we see it's more junior scholars, sometimes they are the most innovative. And we see that, you see that as an editor, and then sometimes we are ready, to help them. We might ask them to perhaps even resubmit their piece so that we believe it can go into peer review, so a bit of a mentoring system. But we are not a journal for experimental thought or completely new ideas, I would say. Even though you mentioned the add-ons, so cyber security would be one of those. I mean, there is just a body of work that's already there. So, you're not out there completely. We also get submissions now like on cognitive warfare. So the new topics, and if they manage to really tie it into a debate that's happening, academic debate, then that would not be a problem. But that link needs to be given.
Sometimes there are scholars and they think that a paper is a policy-oriented paper. Sometimes they are on the edge. Maybe it's 50%, maybe it's less, maybe more. So let's speak about that policy, because you emphasize on policy. The journal has policy in its name. So in practical life, how would you define policy? What is policy for you? And what sort of advice would you give those who are not 100% sure if the paper is sort of policy or it's outside of that scope?
I guess what we mean by that policy-oriented is that you can tell that core message, probably give the abstract to any decision maker, any person really involved in decision making. And that person understands, first of all, what the matter is, and also has a practical takeaway. I think for the journal, the misunderstanding is not so much, or the problem is not so much that the practical applicability, the policy part is missing, but that people misunderstand it the other way around. They send us policy papers, but that's not what we publish. We believe, CSP is an academic journal, and for this sort of policy advice we want to have in there, we believe it's essential that there is thorough theoretical grounding. There is use of concepts that are well established, that are embedded in the literature, that speak to existing scholarship. So that's very important. We don't publish policy papers. We don't have a high threshold, I would say, for what is policy relevant. What is important that there is a concrete takeaway, so an academic paper, but that is not purely theoretical, that shows in real life what's the matter, what's the problem, what's the issue this research addresses, and then a practical takeaway. But it doesn't have to be. Often articles talk about that in the introduction and in the conclusion only, and not beyond that. So I think we get far more papers that we desk checked because there are because there are policy briefs, and very little that we say here, this is not at all policy oriented. In fact, sometimes we say, the practical, the applicability is not there, but let's deal with that in the review process if we think the paper is good.
And if there is a sort of a paper on the edge, do you reject or do you communicate with the person who is like thinking that it's more policy, but you think it's less policy? So that might be sort of controversial situation for some scholars. So like, what's the approach when there is that sort of issue?
No, so for us, it's really academia first in many ways. So it needs to be solid, as said again. And I think the most important is really that scholars make clear at the very beginning, not only the research question, but also what kind of debate they, talk to. So how do they contribute to an ongoing debate? And because of the topic security policy that's contemporary, or normally the topics we get submissions on are current and have a policy relevance. So that is almost always given, but we do desk reject stuff that you would see published by think tanks. That's kind of a descriptive discussion in terms of like almost essay style. We get those quite a bit. Those we desk reject because that is the line we draw. So you have to start with the understanding of the academic debate and then kind of do the research. And then you can always, you almost automatically have this link to the ongoing policy, but not if you have a paper, that would be published by a think tank. And as Nicole mentioned already, we get quite a few of those, actually, the pieces that you could publish, and they're not bad. So the content isn't bad. It's not that, we would tell this scholar, no, this is bullshit. No, but the form is not right. That is the main difference. So we really are quite careful in making sure that it's a scholarly contribution.
If it's right on the edge, Martin, I think sometimes if we have doubts, we say, let's send it out and see. The reviewers will tell us. And in these cases where we have doubts, we also look who is the author. And if we see this is an author who publishes in academic journals, that makes us believe that that person can improve the paper to make it fit. So we would give that a chance. If we see it's a person who is very much in the policy world, who is used to write short policy briefs, and probably reviewers are not very positive, that would be a case where we say, okay, there is probably not much potential. But in the case of doubt, we always give it a try.
We also have the tool to reject and resubmit. This is actually quite useful. So if we think something, could be fixed easily before we send it out to peer review, we can send it back to the author with our comments as the editors. So we might tell them, hey, this is actually, on the verge or, basically a borderline thing. But we believe, because we know who you are, etc., that you could add like a theoretical part or a methodological part. That's sometimes also missing. So we also want people to, even though we don't, necessarily need pages over pages on methods, but still, some kind of research design. And if we see that's missing and we think the author can do it, we send it back to them and we invite them to resubmit. Not often, but that is a tool how we as editors can communicate with an author. And then very often people then do resubmit, and these papers are then in better shape for us to send out.
Yeah, this happened to me as well with other journal. One reviewer said it's okay, the second one said it's not in the scope of the journal. And I was very happy that the main editor basically sent me an email and asked, look, this is the situation. It's not a bad paper, but it needs slightly polishing in this particular part. And I think it's a very nice gesture from the editor, because I think as an experienced scholar and academics, you see within 5 minutes if there is a potential or not in a paper. So I think sometimes it's a good gesture, and sometimes, unfortunately, I think we have to do what we have to do, because otherwise it's impossible to handle the job. So yeah, for some scholars it's rejection, but rejection doesn't mean it's a bad paper, but maybe a different style, different journal.
Yeah, I wanted to just say we as editors are extremely involved. I know that other editors don't necessarily have, put that much time in. And I also have a lot of empathy with editors that don't necessarily, spend that much time with the journal. I'm sure we talk a bit more about these processes, but communicating with authors has always been extremely important for the journal. And the previous editor also taught us how important that is. And I think it's a very, as you say, it's a nice gesture, so that scholars, even if they get a reject, feel like there's a human behind, these emails, and it's taken seriously, and they are helped to then, turn it into a better, even better paper.
Let's talk a little bit about methodology. Many journals claim methodological pluralism. Does methodological pluralism ever create tensions within the editorial board or during the peer review process? Because we know that this pluralism might mean different things for different journals.
I don't recall a case where that would have created issues. For us, method is really a tool that should generate relevant findings that speak to a broad audience, not more, not less. Also, in case of our reviewers, I don't recall a person where you would have seen like just a bias, a methodological bias against something. We are also careful in these cases. We try to assess manuscripts on their own merit. I mean, if you have a quantitative paper, you don't send it to the very qualitative inclined people that then say, that's just numbers and what does that tell us about reality. But we try to send it to reviewers where there is a thematic, of course, but also a methodological fit. There is one issue that we have talked about repeatedly, and that it's a body of research that works with public opinion data. And that's probably the only thing I can tell here that hasn't caused friction, but that has been an issue for us. So papers that use public opinion data, often also through survey experiments or something, and they say, well, people think in the case X, then the state should react this and that way. In that case, we have rejected papers on the grounds that just what people think doesn't necessarily translate into policy making. I mean, there are many mechanisms how this can translate, but unless this is discussed or this is shown, it's not sufficient for CSP. We are well aware doing that elsewhere this is not discussed. There is a body of scholarship that just uses public opinion data as if these were to determine foreign policy choices. I guess that's an editorial decision for the time being. It doesn't mean that we don't publish these papers, but we want to have at least a discussion of how these, what the public thinks translates into policy making. And that's really the only issue that I can recall that created some issues where probably authors, we had also authors then asking, well, don't you publish public opinion papers at all? So we explained our approach.
And is it possible to say if the journal is inclining more to qualitative or quantitative research methods?
I actually think it depends on the submissions because, I think people tend to flock to where they feel more at home. So we get more qualitative submissions, I would say. We've had a few quantitative. We've also published a few quantitative. But it is probably not the journal for the hardcore quant stuff. Because, usually if it's full of formulas, we've had submissions like that, it's not readable across, then it's not our audience who is like, we consider as a broad, audience would not be interested. So those we will potentially tell to try elsewhere. So I think we get more qualitative because maybe there is also more qualitative work in security policy. I'm not sure whether that's true or not, but as Nicole has said, we just want people to have a fitting method, good research question, engage with the literature, and then use a fitting method. And yeah, most of the time it's qualitative. But we would not, kind of just lean any way. I think I would consider myself as a qualitative scholar. I think Eve is a bit more quant. Don't know about you, Nicole, somewhere in between. But if we don't understand the method, we would ask somebody, also including our editorial board. We make sure that we have a lot of diversity on the editorial board, also in terms of these kind of skills. So method skills that in case, if we're completely unsure, we can ask somebody for advice even before sending it out to review.
Looking at submissions over the past decade or 5 years, what major intellectual trends can you see? And is there anything that you would like to highlight regarding trends in security studies that maybe wasn't that much popular 5 or 10 years ago, but now many scholars are into it.
I mean, we do get a lot of cyber submissions, but it's actually interesting. Like a colleague of mine once did a study, or he counted how many cyber articles are published by which journal, and we are actually one of the leading ones publishing cyber research. So that's the kind of thing that I'm saying with the flocking. So if you work on a particular topic, you sometimes have a look at the journals and whether they have published something. I'm not sure it's an intellectual trend, but we have a lot of those security technology submissions. And I guess that is a trend in security, that the technology angle is becoming more and more important. That's the one thing I see. And then we also get quite a bit of submissions also from other localities outside of Europe and the Western world now, which is something we have really tried to also attract in many ways. So we did, a special forum on non-Western, I'm not sure how we called it, but non-Western views on Ukraine. So to also kind of push the boundaries of the security debate away from this constant Western trends. And I think we see that in the submissions as well. We had quite a few from the Indo-Pacific region. And this has been an aim of ours to, include other localities.
Are there any particular themes that you would like to see more submission on? Something that would be beneficial for the journal, but also for the academia?
Yes, there are. And sometimes when we get papers that we don't think are as a standard that they would survive peer review, but we say, what a great topic, and we would like to see more on that. That is, for instance, on the Middle East. We have little on the Middle East. And that also comes with, it's not just papers, because it's authors with whom you work, it's reviewers who you start to involve in the functioning of the journal. Then these reviewers maybe come back as authors. So it comes with a community, which is important for us. Maritime security, it's one of the issues, mostly papers looking at the Asia Pacific. They come now with a maritime focus often. That's a new issue, but we would like to see more diverse things. Maritime security, not just maritime war and deterrence stuff, but broader maritime security. Critical infrastructure, I guess, sustainability as well, and food security. We would love to have more good submissions.
And just to have a look inside of your editorial kitchen, how to encourage people to get more of the papers that you need? Do you use something like special issues that you announce, or do you have any sort of like social networks or social media announcement that scholars, that would be great to have some more papers of this or that?
Good point. We do have special issues, and I think they're really important for us. But we do not actually steer the debates. It's not that we go like, hey, we want a special issue on maritime security. We could, it's actually a good idea, but we have an open call. It used to be for November, so we had a deadline. Now it's on a rolling basis, so people can submit ideas for special issues. And then we discuss them, and normally we go again by kind of the criteria. Is this an interesting topic? Does the selection of papers look good, etc. And we had a few very relevant or things that are in the pipeline now that are coming that are very centered also on warfare, etc. So are very policy relevant, but not on maritime security. So it's a good idea. We did once, I think, Nicole, the special forums we sometimes do steer. So we had one on Ukraine, which is a really well-read still forum and well-cited, where we actually, set the topic ourselves. Even the second one, we said we want a debate on what we as a community, as researchers, got wrong about the war in Ukraine. That was also said by us. But there also we are open to submissions. So it's a bit of both. But we could indeed, try to have a focus on maritime security in the future.
May I ask special forum you mentioned or forum?
Special forum
What does it mean in practice?
Yeah, so the papers are shorter. They're 5,000, not 8,000. It's still peer reviewed. It's still double blind peer reviewed, but the turnover is much quicker. So, to be relevant and timely, you kind of try to get the papers in and out within 4 months approximately. So quick turnarounds. And a slightly less focused than also on the empirical strategy, etc. So it can be more discussion based, but still needs a scholarly focus in it. So yeah, we've had quite a few of those that did really well. Also, in terms of citations and downloads, a few others coming up. That's a tool how you can be a bit quicker because normally, the full timeline to get also a special issue out is obviously almost a year. So sometimes if you want to be quicker, you need a different type of format.
To be honest, also, Martin, we have a list. Every now and then I add a topic like ideas for forums or special issues. But since we are with the journal first as associate editors and now as co-editors, submissions have been increasing. We publish more papers, and we receive so many special issue proposals. We try to do all of them if we think they're good. But there's also a limit at some point. Like, what can we handle? We don't have a backup team or people who manage our emails or do a first screening. It's all us, and we want it to be like that for the moment. But I guess we also haven't had the space in the room to be proactive, soliciting special issues on certain topics. Maybe times change. I don't know. And one day we'll propose it, but yeah, until now.
Academic publishing has become increasingly competitive. There are many sophisticated ways how to design the paper. There are also those advertisements, I will help with the paper. And just for instance, I have a research group on Facebook and LinkedIn with like 500 scholars. And every day I receive, for a small fee, we guarantee that the paper is going to be accepted by this and that journal. In your work, when you have that so many papers coming through your fingers, have you noticed any design change in the papers, any sort of like sophisticated attempts that you would like to warn people not to do? Because it doesn't mean that paper is better, it just means that people are trying to find easier way how to publish and how to quantify the research that basically is very weak.
No, I think worse, Martin, is AI submissions. Everybody's talking about it. I mean, there's lots of debate also on LinkedIn among editors. I don't know. We have 50% more, or even higher than that in the last few months. It's really increased also. Let's say last 12 months. A lot of them very clearly AI aided. Let's be generous and say it was just aided and not completely written. It generates a lot of work for us. Again, we look at all of them. You see quickly that there's no substance, but they're well done. They're usually read well. The English is good. Again, they're essays. They stay on the surface, but until you see that and then desk reject it still, I mean, takes us, let's say, 10 minutes per AI submission. It's annoying and it really creates a lot of, yeah, I think also disgruntlement, in the community. At least we do not send them out to review. But I've received clearly AI generated papers also from other journals. And I think that's the big problem we have right now. And the publishers don't really do anything against that or can't, I don't know. So you're just, hammered by very mediocre content all the time. And you need to make sure that you still pick the nuggets out of that slop, as it's called. That's probably the most important message. Don't use Gen AI to write a paper because it's obvious and you will not get it published. So why do it?
Yeah, I just want to emphasize that because it's really become an issue and it takes time that is scarce. And as Myriam said, you start to see it doesn't engage in depth. It doesn't make much sense in the end, but on the surface, it looks nice. And that's not to say, I mean, AI is there and it's there to stay, but the form you use it really matters. In our attempt to make CSP a more global journal, we see, of course, also that if English is not your native language, we know that it's also not my native language. It takes longer to polish a paper, to write it, probably. So here it can help, and I think it's a great tool. It's in this sense, it's a democratizing tool, right? It very likely also helps people to just polish the language, make the argument probably clearer, make sure it's front loaded, etc., etc. But it's very visible that you need to know your stuff and you need to know your manuscript to make good use of AI, and then it's welcome and it's okay, and probably we get better output. But just create something from scratch or create something about an issue that you don't know about, it doesn't work. So AI can be employed very productively by good people, but if you don't know the things well, then it just doesn't make sense, and it won't, at least with CSP, it doesn't even go out to review. And I must say, when the whole thing started, I was probably the one in the team that was least trained in discovering the I were like, yeah, that looks like AI generated. And I was like, oh wow, how do you know? Oh yeah, lots of subsections, etc., etc. And by now, I feel that I'm a great detective of these papers. So yeah,
I
that's
think
something that should.
the most important point here is that good research just takes time, and it will take time, and nobody can do it for you. So even if you pay somebody to write, on a topic, if there's no substantive empirical research behind it, it will not be published in a journal like ours. And of course, you could make up. So, like in the future, what I'm afraid of is what if they make up the whole research design and it's AI generated? So you kind of pretend you do interviews, etc. Would we still spot it? Not sure. So like 1 year in the future, the AI generated world might look different. But for the moment, it's really the substance that is missing. And even if you employ somebody to write a paper for you, if there's no substance, no, new, element to the paper, it has no place in a good academic outlet. And that is what you can't outsource, actually.
I don't know if this is a public information or not, but I have to ask, when someone submitted a paper and you detected AI, then what happens as a next? Like, is that person blacklisted on your journal? Do you have like little list? Or because, some people might try it more times and then you might have some sort of comparable sort of like scale of bad scholars or something in that way. So
no, that's why I'm saying, I mean, there's no aid or no help so far from, an editor. We work with Scholar One, which is one of the platforms, and you can see whether authors have submitted before, etc. So the system actually logs the names and gives you, kind of track record. So we do sometimes get the same paper over and over, which is desk rejected every time. Just we become a bit more rude every time we desk rejected. But there's no automatism. And I would also consider that dangerous. So you could imagine that in the future, the platform itself has an AI screening. But I know also from other debates that some of the AI, discovery tools that we have are not very good. So they have a lot of false positives. So for example, if you wrote a draft or you have a master thesis or a PhD and you upload it somewhere, and then you turn this into an article, which is completely normal and okay, the AI tool will flag it and stuff like that. So until we can be sure that the right stuff is filtered out, I would be reluctant to use it. And we're not at that point. But it has become such a big issue that I'm pretty sure something needs to happen on that front. And the blacklisting might be a tool as well. But then, a person could just open up a new email address, Gmail address, resubmit. If you want to cheat, there is many ways and how you can cheat, unfortunately.
Yeah, I spoke with some senior scholars in the 70s, 80s, and they told me that the only way how to make sure that the paper is good or written by the real person is to work on those research communities, to meet together and to know what we're doing. And then, people, of course, you can't know all the people in the world, that's impossible, but at least you have those main scholars and main strains of research. So, because for me, one of the most obvious part of the AI is AI-generated literature review. When you have a perfect literature review, all the main names, all the main works, but then you're thinking, where is the connection to your research? And this is the part, when I basically see, like, you name so many scholars, but how relevant are they to your research? So
that's why Nicole said, that you need to know about your topic. If you do, the tools actually do good research, good kind of paper reviews. If you use it well, but you need to know what is in, what is out, what to tell it to do, etc., etc. I think what we need to be careful of is that we don't exclude scholars that are not already part of the Western community again. And I mean, it's a hunch, but I think it's mostly non-Western scholars that submit these papers. And it shows us something that's not pretty. And that's, the world of academic publishing is actually not easy to get into. So our standards are kind of modeled on a Western standard of what academia does, etc. That is necessary, but we need to be able to open doors to other communities, or at least let them, come closer. And at the moment, I think the opposite is happening. So they're using these tools in ways that are actually not opening doors; it's closing them. So Nicole said it's good if you use it for, language stuff, but if you use it for the whole thing, it's bad. So we need a way of having this conversation across borders and, also with the non-Western scholars. And that is not happening at the moment, unfortunately. Yeah, so I don't see solutions right now, only problems.
let's go beyond the AI, and I would like to ask you for the most common mistakes that you can see as editors, something that is not AI, but something that is major for your work and for the journal.
It's something actually quite basic. We have a so-called checklist on our website also that asks for the basic ingredients of an academic paper: a clear research question, a theoretical framework, clearly communicated, transparent empirical strategy, and like the identification of the takeaway. What does this paper tell us? And it's surprising because it sounds so basic, but probably more than half of our desk rejects are about this, because one or several parts of this is missing.
Yeah, sometimes it's about ego. I am scholar, I already published, so why should I read all those little letters, right? So I know what you mean.
Yeah, unfortunately, we also see this.
Right.
Yeah.
Also, from the other perspective, peer review process is often criticized as slow, inconsistent, sometimes susceptible to bias. But on the website, it's written that you have 5 days for the first sort of decision. So how do you manage that transparency of the peer review? And how do you select your reviewers? Who can be your reviewer, for instance?
So the 5 days is actually us taking a decision on the manuscripts that come in. So usually this is, do we desk checked or do we send out to review? But as said, we're very hands-on. So we meet once a week. Everybody's carefully prepared. It takes us at least an hour to go through all the submissions, and we discuss these kind of do's and don'ts and what has potential, etc. And then normally you in Scholar One, so these platforms give you suggestions for potential peer reviewers. Well, sometimes they're good, sometimes they're not. either we know people that we then invite, that work on a topic, or you go through the list of cited authors, then do a bit of research to see whether they, are well published, etc., and then invite them. I have to say we actually have a fairly good, experience with peer reviewers. I mean, sometimes they're late, yes, but I would say 80% or more, stay within the time, which is, I think, 3 to 4 weeks that the platform gives them. Lots of them are very good reviews in the sense of, they really engage with the topics. They give a very good feedback. Also, most of them are fair. I would say 98% are really fair and try to help. So in our experience, it's still a very good tool. And I mean, we do make sure that the people we invite have a PhD or are very close to completing the PhD or are experts, in the sense of on topics. Sometimes, I mean, it can happen that you ask 5 or 6 reviewers and all of them turn you down, so you have to stay at it. But so far, for me, the process now behind the scene has been a very positive one. And I know people bitch about peer review, etc. But actually, since we're co-running the journal, I have more faith in peer review than
We also, journals have usually this long list of people who are on the editorial board, right? And we try to engage this editorial board. We communicate to these people that we invite to be part of the editorial board. We will ask you for a few things, not a lot. But there have been cases when we would ask a member of the editorial board if they can suggest reviewers for a topic. And for special issues and forums, we also ask the coordinators to submit a list of reviewers. Why do we do that? Because these are cases where we get maybe 8, maybe 10, maybe more submissions even on one topic. And especially if we are not experts on that, it starts to be difficult because you will have to come up with at least 35 names, if not more. And that starts to be difficult. So then we also solicit suggestions who can act as a reviewer. And we might draw on this pool or not, or in part, that varies. But at least this is also input that proves important when we do special issues and forums.
And for regular submissions, do you encourage people to list potential reviewers or not? Because I know some journals do, some don't. So what's your approach to that?
I don't think there is this option. I know some journals actually have these options where you can fill in reviewers. No, we don't. And we wouldn't actually go for it. Only, as Nicole said, in the case of special issues, because imagine, you have to send out 10 papers basically at the same time. They all submit at the same time. So that's why we need a bit of help. But even there, we don't always go for the ones that were suggested, but look beyond it. Sometimes we have to. I mean, I remember some papers where we have 6 people turning us down or 7 even, and then you need to be a bit creative and I think a bit beyond. Sometimes you might also ask a colleague. We all have colleagues that might know, about the topic, and then you ask them, hey, do you know somebody who is a good peer reviewer? And that's how you then get the names. And eventually somebody will say yes.
How do you approach young, early career junior academics or scholars who are just beginning their careers? Is there any encouragements for those people? Because we know that someone is like, let's say, in postdoc or even during the PhD and is thinking, oh, I would like to publish, but there are those big guys who publish already 50 papers, so what should I say to such a journal? On the other hand, that researcher might be talented and the research paper might be really nice. So what would be the message to those junior researchers from the journal? And the second question in this, what about those who are living in parts of the world where they don't have similar conditions as the people in the West? I mean, people in sort of poor countries where is the war or conflict ongoing, some discrimination against, because this is what really exists. So how do you approach that segment of scholars?
So the message is, please send your research to us. Absolutely. If you can do all the checks on the checklist, and you think you have a paper about a contemporary issue of international security, please do send it. We don't have a formal program or an approach, but we always try to be maybe extra supportive is the right way to put it. We said before, if there are borderline cases or if we have some doubts, we start to look at who are the authors. And if we see it's a junior scholar, because it's also often obvious things that you see. So for instance, someone tries to convert a PhD into an article. They're very typical things that you identify. Then you say, okay, let's take this, and you provide some more guidance. Maybe the reject and resubmit decisions that we give are, most of them are probably to junior scholars, at least a substantial number. That we say, look, this and that needs to be done, or you actually don't have a method section or whatever. We try to support these people. And the same goes for research from elsewhere. Where we see, okay, maybe there is an issue that it's just because the education is not according to the standard Western approach, or some things in the paper are just done differently, or the language used is different. We try to communicate that if we see potential. What we can't do is to lift the standard of a paper up. Like we really need to see potential there. So these papers can also be rejected at some point, but at least then we think what we can do is to provide them with good feedback to keep working on their projects. But it is a problem that you see more now. I'm not talking about junior scholars anymore, but people in the global south, to put it that way. It's often about, I'm based in Latin America, and the traditional way of scholarship is just a different writing style, much more lengthy, less crispy, and that's not favorable for with that you don't publish in CSP. Then we always we have an informal mentoring scheme. It's a folder in our Dropbox where we say, okay, this is a candidate. We think that's great research. There is a lot of work behind. Let's try and take this person by the hand and make it work. There are cases it has worked and these papers are published and they're great, but there are also cases when people didn't resubmit or they didn't want to take on our offer for whatever reason.
There is the Bernard Brodie Prize with your journal, and it recognizes the best article published in the journal each year. I would like to ask about the qualities that this prize is focusing on, and why is it important for your journal? What does it mean? Because, as you know, in academia there are so many prizes, and some of them are harder to get and some of them are easier to get. So let's clarify this.
Oh, it's hard to get. No, but I mean, we don't have a very, very clear criteria. It's an old prize that actually honors Brodie, as the father of arms control, I guess. And we, as an editorial team, select the articles that we liked best. The criteria are loose. So liked best can mean, best topic, best kind of approach, most mind-boggling, whatever. We create a list of our selection, and then we have people from the editorial board that kind of rank them. So we make sure that our selection is diverse. We usually go for diversity, also in terms of genders, topics, areas the scholars come from. Then we select, diverse set of editorial board members. They rank, and that's how then, the winner is established. We also make sure that we always communicate about who is shortlisted, who gets the prize, etc., because you see how people are delighted, even if they're just shortlisted. And we give them a little certificate at the end. For some, it might mean something on the CV. Of course, you don't know. But it's a celebration, I think, of good scholarship that we do. And it's a nice process because for us, it's also at the end of the year, we kind of look back, at what have we published this year. And you go through all the articles again yourself. And it's a nice kind of ritual, I think, that gives, appreciation to what has happened.
We don't ask the jury members for a report on their decisions. We simply ask them for a ranking. So we don't know what their criteria are. And there's actually quite some variation also. So some rank a paper as the best, that others rank fifth in the selection. And we also we tell the jury members, if you think there is a great paper that should be shortlisted for the prize, but that we haven't put on the shortlist, you can suggest it. I think in the past years that hasn't been done. Yeah. But again, it's also, I think, just for Myriam said it's a nice process. It's also showcasing what's going on in the field, what are people doing. And these jury members get to read these papers and in depth. It's not just that they look at the abstract and then say yes, no. Then amongst each other, the shortlisted papers, it gets communicated. So it's also a process to just showcase what we're doing, what is going on in the field, what is seen as good scholarship and contributing to the debate.
How is journal doing regarding the quantity of articles? Do you have any cap how many articles you can publish per year? Do you have any sort of like recommendation from the scholars, from your friends, publish more, publish less? And also the scope of the journal, do you plan to expand it in some topics, or you want to keep it as it is at the moment with the core subjects that are listed on the website?
So we don't have a cap. We can publish as much as we want to, which we also try to do. For us, the criterion is we can handle what we get so far. So the criterion is if we get good stuff, we publish it. Of course, our publisher recommends to publish more, which we have done with an increasing number of submissions also. But I should say that the number of published articles hasn't increased proportionally to the submissions. So we get many, many more submissions, but unfortunately not of the quality that we would like to. But if the current trends are to continue, we might publish a bit more also in the future. But there is not, so authors shouldn't be at all concerned that there is a consideration, oh, there is already so much. If there's good scholarship, we publish it. And there's also we don't have an issue of backlog. As soon as the papers are through peer review, they go to copy editing, typesetting, and they come online, and then they're put on the next issue. So that's a positive thing, I guess, that people also don't have to wait 1 and 2 and 3 years until their article is out in an issue, but it gets just put usually in the upcoming issue, and if not, in the one after.
I went through the editorial board of your journal, and there are many names I know, some of them are friends, and it's a very impressive list. Some journals, they prefer longer lists, some they have less people on the editorial board. What's important for you, for your journal, that a person is on your editorial board? What sort of sign is it for people like me, scholars, academics?
We have debates about the editorial board regularly because we want to keep it fresh and new. It grows over the years, though. Sometimes people step down, and then we try and find somebody who can, be a successor or whatever. But one of the aims has been to have a broad representation, also geographically. So we are working on, expanding again beyond the West. It's not easy. Also to keep these people engaged. As Nicole said, we use them sometimes for peer review, but not that much. We don't flood them with requests. And for the Brodie Prize, but for us, I think it does reflect a bit where we want the journal to also expand to. And that is once again beyond the West. I think that is one of the most important goals that we set ourselves maybe 3 years ago already. So to have a better Indo-Pacific focus, but also Africa. Africa is obviously one of these, continents that are underrepresented in academia, even though better scholarship is coming. So we are trying, and Latin America, sorry, Nicole. So we are trying to also have that reflect in the editorial board. How do you get on the editorial board? Often we ask people, often it's people that published with us. So these are people that we know, are good scholars, and that we had good interactions with, and that we think can be door openers also to these communities that we want to engage a bit more. But
And when Myriam said, sorry, that we wanted to stay fresh, I guess that's really important for us, and that's a policy that comes at least from the previous editor as well. We don't just want to showcase a name on our website. We want that person to reply to our emails. If they get a review request every now and then, at least say if they can't do it, no. We don't want people just to figure there. But to also act as ambassadors, like if they have graduate students, for instance, where they see fit, tell them, hey, I am on the editorial board of Contemporary Security Policy. That manuscript is a good fit. Send it there. If they're at a conference, maybe suggest a special issue for CSP. So we want people to be aware that they are part and an important part for us of the journal, and basically not forget that, oh yeah, they put my name on their website 10 years ago, and basically since then I've forgotten about it. Our policy is also, the list does get longer, but people who have been active there for some time and have done their service, they also step down. So we want to be honest in some way also. These are people, I mean, it's their time, it's their energy also they put into the journal, and that should be acknowledged.
The last question for today's interview: your priorities, visions, and the message for the scholars.
Priority visions. So, I mean, what we really want is good scholarship. Now, this can be varied, but it needs to be solid in the sense of somebody has to have done the research. And I think that is an important message. We want to see on page 1 or 2, what the contribution is. And the vision is, as said, that we go beyond this purely Western bubble in which we often grow up in and then stay in, which is probably not easy to do. And we want to be diverse in the sense of topics and approaches. As soon as it's interesting, we want it. That would be my message. Nicole, add-ons?
Yes, and I think we also want to continue this community, which is a dispersed community across time zones and continents and topics and everything. But still, we often get some people write back, or they come back after some time, and they say, I had a really good experience with you, and I'm thinking about writing this or that, or maybe do a special issue or whatever. We want to encourage that. You, Martin, said before, well, there are so many journals today, so it's easy to get lost, but keep this sense of a community and keep engaging people, and start to engage, hopefully, people from more diverse places still, so to get a really global reach in substance and not just in theory.
Hey, I want to double down on the community thing. And I mentioned several times that it's time intensive. And part of it is community building and, being nice to people. I think also one of your points, Martin, from the beginning, it takes time, but it really pays off. So across the board, we get very good, like people are very happy with what we provide them with, even if we desk reject. Like at the first go, we write a little, something on how a paper could be improved and why it was desk rejected, etc. We were told that by Hilke, the predecessor, that this being nice to people carries a long way. and that's really it. So I think some of the authors come back. I mean, people submit again, even years after, and that kind of shows, that if you take this work as part of being in a research community, you have a much better experience all the way around, and that really works.
And I can confirm those words by my own perspective, that sometimes you have those technical people going according to impact factor and citation and quantity and all that. But I always say this is okay, this is something relevant for the journal because you must have some indicators of quality. But on the other hand, ask about community. Who published there? Who is on the board? Who is the editor? Do people know each other? Is this journal legit? It's the quality of papers consistent, or those little details, because those little details are very important in academia. Professor Cavelty, Associate Professor Jenne, many thanks for sharing your insights, for practical insights about editorial work. I'm happy that we could also elaborate on different variety of topics for junior researchers and researchers. And I wish you good luck in your work, because I know how demanding it is. It's a 24-hour day for you anyway. So anyway, thank you for being on the IR Thinker.
Thank you, Martin. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.